Hi, I'm Bharathy Singaravel from the News Minute. We're here with Sinéad O'Carroll, the editor of The Journal. They're a Dublin-based independent digital media outlet. Sinéad has presented a number of national television and radio shows. She's a regular contributor to news, current affairs, and sports programs. Hi, Sinéad. So I'd like to start off with asking you for a broad overview of what's setting off anti-immigration sentiments in Ireland. And also, is there a bleed over from anti-immigration sentiments in Northern Ireland that's affecting what's happening in Ireland? And what have the various trigger points been?
I guess the starting point is that the anti-immigration sentiment is very prolific if you look online, and less prolific across everyday life in Ireland. There are definitely flashpoints where it is obvious, but it is not something that everybody would see daily. There's definitely a bleed over, I wouldn't say just from the UK, but also from Europe. There's kind of a shift to right-wing governments and who have won power in Europe because of anti-immigrant talking points. And that's, you've seen in the UK as well, this talk of migrant boats and stopping the boats. We don't see that in Ireland, but there's definitely some of the politics of it have shifted over to Ireland. The anti-immigration sentiment that we do see, the main trigger point for it was when the number of people coming to Ireland seeking asylum increased dramatically. We saw that because the amount of conflicts happening across the world, the amount of climate change displacement, and just the increase of numbers of people coming to Europe in general. And when that happened, Ireland was not prepared for the numbers who came in terms of the infrastructure of our asylum seeking system. So what happened was there was hundreds of people ended up sleeping on tents in one street across very close to where our international protection applications office is. So it became this flashpoint because people could see like Ireland didn't have the infrastructure to take in the numbers that we were legally obliged to take in. So that was the starting point for the real flashpoint and the real talking points at a national level and at a very high level, the Taoiseach and the Taoiseach and other people having to bring it in. So that's probably where the main debate started at a mainstream level because of that.
Yeah, there was the Racket Hall protests that happened right in Austria when the hotel was temporarily shut down to house asylum seekers. So that was also a flashpoint.
So because of the number of people who were coming in, obviously for various reasons, various legitimate reasons, they have to be housed, they have to be put up. We had ran out of accommodation suitable for the asylum seeking process. The government were scrambling to try and find places. A lot of hotels, a lot of accommodation situations that would have been used for other reasons were contracted to provide accommodation. This has created flashpoints in various
an economic flashpoint, from a tourism point of view.
So there has been some of that. So hotels that have been used, people in those rural towns have said, well, this is our only hotel and we use it for our functions, or we won't get tourism in if we don't have a hotel. So there have been discussions around that, or a lot of the things that people will say is we don't have enough GPs, we don't have enough school places, we don't have the infrastructure. So that's where the economic talking points come in. But those talking points would be the same even if there wasn't migrants. So there's some element of pointing a finger at migrants to say this is why it's happening, whereas it's actually happening anyway.
The housing shortage is also being sort of deflected.
Yes. So similar to other countries and other cities across Europe, we have a huge supply problem in housing, and we have for over 10 years now. It is increasingly difficult to find a suitable rental accommodation if you're renting, or to find a house that you can afford if you want to get a mortgage and buy. Is something that the government has been grappling with and has not been able to get on top of. So it's seen from each step of the ladder. So, students trying to get accommodation that doesn't break the bank, to migrants coming in doing really important jobs, not being able to get suitable accommodation, to families of husband, wife, kids who can't get a mortgage and find a suitable house near schools. And it is, we cannot build enough houses. It doesn't look like we'll be able to build enough houses anytime soon. So it's something that's ongoing because of obviously the frustrations with that. Some people, and it's the minority, are pointing to immigration and saying we can't house our own, so why are we allowing people in? There's, it's a fairly simple argument that is easily dismantled, but it has been one that has gained quite a lot of traction. There's a slogan, Ireland is full, that is seen a lot across social media. Actually, a lot of the use of it across social media is from outside of Ireland. You'll see a lot of accounts that are UK and US based. Sky News actually did an analysis of it this week and found up to 70% of the use of it is outside of Ireland. But it has been a slogan that has actually made its way into mainstream politics as well. It has gained some traction, and it has become, I guess, less problematic to use it than it was when it was first used. It would have been seen as like extremely far right when it was first used, and it has moved more into mainstream politics recently.
Speaking of what's online, this whole hate speech as free speech narrative has also taken over a lot of anti-immigration rallies, whether it's in the UK, the US, or Australia. And I believe the Irish Freedom Party had opposed former Minister for Justice Charlie Flanagan's 2019 consultation on hate speech. Last year, Ireland passed a specific law against hate crime. But why is there so much opposition to it? Where is the opposition coming from? Is it a problem with the legislation, or is it sort of a far-right sort of opposition to it?
Yeah, so the Irish Freedom Party wouldn't be very electorally successful, but they would try and garner kind of opposition mostly online to things like this. This hate speech, so we passed the hate crime legislation last year, but the hate speech part of it was taken out because it just didn't gain the necessary support. You could argue that a lot of that was because of the online noise, and online noise is often a lot louder than the reality of on the ground. But parties like Sinn Féin started to kind of get jitters around supporting that aspect of it. A lot of the time, a lot of talking points do bleed into Ireland from the UK and the US. And this one was probably more from the US, that obsession with free speech and the idea that free speech is total, even if it includes hate speech. A lot of the arguments against it that probably won out were the pragmatic side, how to police this, especially in an internet age when we aren't regulating the big tech companies on what is happening on their platforms. A lot of those tech companies have their European headquarters in Ireland. We rely on them massively for tax intake and economic purposes and jobs. And while we do have, our data protection office in Ireland, has fined these companies like for various different things, in the same way as like regulating the internet across the world. There are no easy answers, and this part of the hate crime legislation fell foul of that. It hasn't actually reignited, the debate hasn't reignited recently about it, except for when it came to, when we see real world impacts of online hate speech. One of the arguments against the hate speech was we already have incitement to hatred legislation, but there have been so few charges and so few prosecutions made under that the guards and the DPP, the Director of Prosecutions, would say it's not very useful to us. Like, we can't actually, it's not a good tool for when we're trying to, take action against people who are using hate speech. And when we see that bleed into real world and actual real life violence with a hate element to it, that's where maybe it'll come back into play.
I mean, you went into the US. I also wanted to ask you how much of US politics is impacting Irish politics. You have elections coming up later this month for president. And there was mixed martial artist Conor McGregor, who is also a far-right icon, who had the backing of Elon Musk, and then he spoke at the White House against immigration. He made the announcement that he wanted to run after meeting Donald Trump. So these two far-right factions in two different countries, if you could go more into how they are sort of bouncing off each other, where they're coming together, how these two factions are playing out together in Ireland.
Yeah, geographically, Ireland is obviously very far away from the US, but it's also our nearest neighbour on that side. And obviously we're both English speaking as well. So our interest in US politics has always been huge. So there's always an element that things that are happening there do kind of become talking points here, despite our very different government setups and our different cultures. The Conor McGregor Elon Musk thing has been interesting because Conor McGregor obviously was massively popular in 2016. He's arguably one of the most famous Irish people in the world. He was loved particularly amongst a young cohort of people. But the opinion of Conor McGregor in Ireland has changed hugely. He has been involved in a number of legal scrapes, and most recently he was found in a civil court to be liable for the rape of a woman in a hotel. That basically would have made him like a person non gratis when it comes to electoral success. That's not the same in the US. Exactly. Obviously, there is multiple people in high-level jobs, including the presidency, who have civil rape case findings against them. But Conor McGregor actually just misunderstood the role of the president as well. The president is not the president is our head of state, but it's a nominal.
Is he more of a figurehead?
It's a figurehead.
Yeah.
And, Conor McGregor was putting out these ideas of things that he would do as president, which are not possible. He had no chance of electoral success. He was polling terribly anytime people asked whether you would want him to be president. And this idea, I think, that he misunderstood it bled into the Elon Musks of the world, who misunderstood it as well. In the end, he did have a pathway if he wanted to get onto the ballot. You can go to our regional councils and ask for nominations. You need 4 of them, or he could go to our Oireachtas and ask members of parliament, and he needed 20 of them. That route was always going to be closed down. Once he had the civil rape case finding against him, the councils were more than likely closed down, but he still could have gone and went in front of them. He had sent in his documents, he'd sent in his letters to say he wanted to come and speak and seek the nomination. And in the end, he didn't turn up. He pulled out last minute. So we're not sure how serious he ever was, but it did, if you look at the coverage of him in the US, where he is still more popular and is still known. Like I was looking at some of the coverage at the time, there's very little mention of any of his criminal scrapes. There's very little mention of how unpopular he is in Ireland. So it probably worked from a marketing point of view from his business in the US that he did this. There was like very uncritical reports and like obviously just the videos outside. He made this video outside our government buildings. He was in the White House. He's a perfect
in a green suit.
Yeah, like he's a perfect bedfellow for someone like Donald Trump. It made total sense that he appears in the White House, but he is not a representative and not a popular one of people in Ireland.
But speaking of what's happening on the ground, there have been some recent attacks on Indians in Ireland. And is this something that's, like for example, in the US or in Australia, there was a very specific anger, at least from some people's perspective, towards Indians among immigrants. Is that what's happening in Ireland, or is it just a larger anti-immigration? You're brown, so we don't want you here.
Yeah, it's really shameful, but it's the latter.
So it's not like a cultural face-off rather than just a socioeconomic one.
Yeah, and I think one of the more positive lenses that you can look at the shameful episode is that the Indian community in Ireland is so strong that they were able to band together and make sure it was known what was happening, and that there was this connection between the attacks that needed to be named and called out, and that specific actions needed to be taken. And I think that speaks to the leaders that the Indian community have in Ireland, and the ties that they have with the Irish government, that there was kind of meetings set up immediately. There is a sense that it is so there's been nobody charged for any of the attacks. The sense is that there is a youth crime element to these incidents. I actually came across one myself maybe a year and a half ago, where there was a young man who was just looking for trouble. I could see it from a mile out. He was looking for trouble, and two Indian young men in their very early 20s had got onto the Lewis, which is our tram service, and this Irish guy started, making threats to them. And I just intervened and said, "These lads are with me, go away." And he did go away. He was definitely targeting them because they were brown and not Irish, but I don't think he would have known. It was only when I was talking to them afterwards, they said they had arrived from India. They were a little bit scared, but also fine. And there have been interventions, like we saw the really horrific attack. A woman intervened. It's hard to know exactly what the point is, what the exact trigger is. But when there's all of this anti-immigration sentiment online, it bleeds into real life, and people punch down. People think, "Oh, well, I can blame you for my problems." There's an element of that, and there's an element of antisocial behaviour as well in it, which is kind of probably two sides of the same coin. Yeah.
So I just like to quickly go back to the presidential elections before we move on to Palestine. It's a three-way fight. Where do each of the candidates stand on immigration?
So because the presidential race, it's a really weird one. So they will talk about policy and they will talk about their opinions on political issues, but in the end, there's actually nothing they can do when they get the job. So we have to have this real unusual balance in the election as we're going through it. But they have been asked about immigration. The three candidates are. So we have, it's actually the smallest ballot paper we'll have for a long, long time. We usually have a lot more candidates on the ballot. So it's actually quite narrow, the field. So we have one Fianna Fáil TD, or one Fianna Fáil candidate. So Fianna Fáil has been one of the biggest parties in Ireland since the establishment of the state. One Fine Gael, who have been the other big party since the establishment of the state, and one candidate who is seen as who is all of the more left-leaning parties of the country came together and nominated Catherine Connolly. So she is the candidate of the left parties. So they're all pretty political establishment figures. Two TDs and one person who doesn't have a political background but is running for Fianna Fáil. So it's actually quite a narrow field. So
she's also been a very pro-Palestine voice.
Yeah, and so while their politics on the left and right are very, the other two aren't right, they're very, very centrist, but there isn't a huge difference in terms of their political opinions on various things. When they're asked about immigration, the Fianna Fáil and the Fine Gael candidate, because they are in government, they will stick to government. They're in coalition. They're sticking to government lines, which are generally, yes, there's a lot of immigration. We need to, they'll talk very much in non-humanitarian terms. We need to make sure the numbers, I hate that phrase, but that's used a lot. The numbers coming are very big, and we need to have a better system to make sure that we have a fair system, that people who need to be here get to stay, and people who should be rejected are rejected and leave the country in a seamless but humanitarian way. Catherine Connolly, who's the candidate of the left, would be more her answers would be more based on the humanitarian side. If people need to leave their countries, we need to have a welcome for them, and we need to have a better system than what is currently in place. But again, the other two would say that as well. We need to have a better system, and we need to make sure that there's a humanitarian aspect to it. So there's no anti-immigration sentiment amongst the three candidates. So it's not going to be a massive talking point, although they will get asked what the government should do in terms of immigration policy.
I'd like to talk about numbers since we brought this up. 149,200 immigrants was the number that was given for April 2024. It was said it was a 17-year high, and the third successive time that this 12-month period saw more than 100,000 immigrants. But is there more to these numbers? Because, for example, when you saw in Australia, the rallies kept fixating on just the immigration data, even though it was being misrepresented. So is that sort of playing into the conversations on the ground?
Yeah, so the fact that the numbers are high, I think there is a general understanding that there has been a huge amount of geopolitical conflict at the moment. Like when journalists were talking to the people in those tents, there was a huge number of people from Afghanistan, from Palestine, people who've been displaced for climate change reasons. But there was also huge numbers of people from other countries that would have cultural ties or familial ties to Ireland now because of previous immigration, places like Nigeria. The number is probably the reason that it became such a big deal is because of the lack of accommodation. So I think at any given time we have hundreds of people, mostly men, who aren't accommodated because we don't have the infrastructure set up, and that we're not fulfilling our legal obligations on that. So that's probably why the numbers became. There was partly a pragmatic thing, and then that's obviously seized upon by people who are anti-immigrant and who want to make it a thing, like the Ireland is full slogan. But there's also an element of it because of what's happening in Britain. There was, the talk of Rwanda and the talk of a crackdown on illegal immigration. There was a sense that there is people coming across the border from Northern Ireland into Ireland, and our Justice Minister continually says that even now, that a significant percentage of people who are coming to Ireland are coming from across the Northern Irish border, and that's part of the numbers conversation as well.
I'd like to pivot to Palestine now. Has it been a flashpoint in nativist debates?
I think with Palestine and Ireland, the majority of the country and the government has been in step with each other. We recognised Palestine, the state of Palestine last year. That was something that was welcomed by the majority of the people of Ireland. We, in general, want to see more being done by the international community to stop what's happening to the people of Palestine, and to work towards peace and a two-state solution. That has been Ireland's position for a long, long time. It's been the Irish people's position. And I think, in general, Irish people would like our government to do more, even though from an international view.
Yeah, they've been quite critical of Israel. I would like to know how they're perceived within Ireland, or whether they're doing enough.
Most people will see the Irish government as having said the right things and trying to move other countries to a viewpoint that what Israel has been doing, they have committed war crimes, and what the Palestinians have had to endure has been horrific, and we are getting further away from a peaceful resolution. There have also been calls for the government to do more. So we have legislation called the Occupied Territories Bill that has been on the legislative books for a long time, which would not just in this conflict, but stop trade with any country that is an occupying force in any territory. There are pragmatic reasons why the government hasn't got it over the line, particularly around the difficulties of financial services. But because it is something that is on the books, is ready to go, it is something that a lot of people in Ireland we can do more. We could do the Occupied Territories Bill. So it's a kind of tangible example of yes, you're saying the right things and you're trying to move countries, especially in Europe, along with you. But this is something that you could do. We have joined the South African case in the ICJ. We have written and signed all of the joint statements that are coming from EU leaders in EU countries, and there have been lobbying, real lobbying attempts to try and get trade sanctions brought in. But there is a sense in Ireland that we can't do enough because of the gravity of the situation.
It's interesting, the public pressure about Palestine that is being put on the Irish government. Does that also come from what I can read, there seems to be a sense of solidarity that comes off looking back at Irish history. So if you could speak on that, of where that sense of solidarity comes from, what is it that about what is happening in Palestine speaks all the way across the world to people in Ireland?
Yeah, there has historically been an affinity between the Irish people and the Palestinian people. I think our colonial past is a significant, that's a significant reason for it. The idea of a difficult peace process being needed in a two-state solution is part of it. I think Ireland's outsized ability sometimes to use our soft power makes people feel like we can do something with that affinity, that it doesn't, that it can be more than just a hand of friendship, that it can be actually very useful. We have the Dunnes Stores strikes during South African apartheid that Nelson Mandela would have said was a significant shift in international relations with the country at the time. People are very proud of that.
Speak more on the Dunnes Store protest.
Yeah, so Dunnes Stores workers, a handful of women, decided that they would not handle goods from South Africa as long as apartheid was still ongoing. And it was something that started as a very small, very female-led protest, and it gained traction, and it showed people that actually you can do something tangible. It's very, like, you can draw a line from that to the Occupied Territories Bill. Like, we will not handle goods, and the fact that was recognised by Nelson Mandela, again, it's that outsized sense that, like, we can do something. And we've also gone through our own colonial past and our own peace process, and knowing these things aren't perfect, but you can get to a peace. And I think that is where some of the affinity comes from. But part of it as well is just the humanitarian sense of it as well. Like, what's happening even before the current assaults on Gaza, like what's happening in the West Bank. It's always been something that Irish people have talked about, there's the sense of history, but there's also just the knowledge. We have had a significant knowledge that I don't think other news media in other countries, like if I see what news media Americans are getting, or other European countries, I think we've had more of a sense of what's happening in Palestine for longer than maybe other places have.
You opened up the lead for my next question. So I wanted to talk about media responsibilities as well, especially in the digital media space. So how is independent digital media viewed in Ireland by the public?
We have an extremely discerning news consumer in Ireland. We have had people who, a huge section of our population, listen to news radio every day. They read news media every day. They pay for subscriptions for newspapers. So we have a very discerning audience, and we have a lot of press freedom, which we sometimes probably take for granted when I'm somewhere like here. And and we, even when we see what's happening in the US now, we do have an awful lot of press freedom, and it's something that we are very grateful for, but there's responsibilities that come with it as well, to make sure that we are doing it well for our readers and our users. So people in Ireland do appreciate the independence. We have a public broadcaster who is independent as well. They have a high level of trust. All of our legacy brands have a high level of trust. And then places like my own publication, The Journal, which was set up 15 years ago, we have garnered a significant amount of trust because of our independence and because of the work that we're doing. A lot of the time to take division out of it and just be information led, like news without the noise, just like informing people and allowing them to form their own opinion, instead of being just led by government policy or led by populist opinion online.
I wanted to ask about media responsibility. That how has your responsibilities as a journalist changed how you see yourself in the online space? Because there is the proliferation of AI, of fake news, of the kind of polarization that happens online. And that's a kind of navigation that you've also had to do, which I don't know how much print media has to deal with it as much as digital media, and particularly independent media houses need to deal with it.
Yeah, and your responsibilities, I find, in not pulling those like divisive topics, not polarizing people even more. You still have to try and service everyone. I find language is a big part of that, making sure you're using inclusive language, but also accessible language, and that you're not leaving readers behind in how you cover topics. We do a lot of fact checking. We do a lot of online fact checking of kind of myths and things that start to become talking points, and we try and get to them as early as we can. We have a kind of a pretty good dialogue with our users, and we ask them to like send us things that they see that they're unsure of, kind of like a no stupid question attitude towards things, like, oh, I saw this online, is it true? We would have had a huge amount of that during COVID, when the amount of misinformation going around online was just off the charts. But that still happens now. We'd still get requests sometimes from people saying, hey, my aunt is sending this around our family WhatsApp group. Can you write something so I can show her what's actually happening? Or, is this true? And so we would do a lot of that, which can be quite powerful work, particularly if it's led by the reader. But when we're doing those fact checks, we also want to make sure that we're not. So fact checking in itself has become kind of this politicized thing. So we want to make sure that we're outside of that politicized, because it's not the approach, it's the reaction to it. So we want to make sure that we don't get that reaction to it, that people can still trust what we're doing on fact checks. So we do a lot of political fact checks on all sides of the political framework in Ireland, and then we do the online stuff as well. So that's a big part of our responsibility. And the other part of our responsibility, I find, is just not allowing opinion and populism to take over. Like, it can be very easy to make one cohort of people happy by feeding them their own opinion back to themselves. So it's making sure that we're not doing that, that we're, we have the courage to just cover the news as we see it. Like, being factual, which isn't always the same as being objective, as Gary Lineker said about the Palestine issue. And that really spoke to me. Like, you have to be factual, but you can also present what's happening is wrong, like in Gaza.
And last question, I was interested that you have, and also that the journal also has an Irish language page, and you've not, there aren't many Irish language speakers. So what is the language politics of that? We have a lot of language politics in the South. That's something that we've also covered at TNM. So I was just interested in what the reasoning behind it was.
Yeah, so in Ireland, our language is Irish, but because of our colonial past, not everybody speaks it anymore. We all learn it in school, but we don't all use it daily. So I would have cúpla focal, but not fluency. But there is a really vibrant Irish language community in Ireland, and we weren't servicing them. We weren't servicing them news in their language, and we felt it was time to rectify that, and also to make sure, because a lot of the Irish speakers live in Gaeltacht communities, live in Irish speaking communities, we weren't servicing their stories either, and we weren't putting their lens on national stories, or we weren't picking up their local stories. So yeah, we've just hired our first Gaeltacht team, which is really exciting. The politics of it are probably really positive at the moment. The Irish language is having a real moment. You mentioned Mucara from NECAP earlier when we were talking. There's a youth vibrancy in Irish language culture at the moment, which is really exciting to capture. So the politics of it are probably very positive. So it's a nice time to be able to make that change and be able to do it for the journal.
Thank you, Sinead, for joining us.
Thank you.